What's up, everybody, and welcome to the latest episode of the Chicago Football Show. I'm Scott Bair, and back with me, my tag team partner, Carmen Vitali, who's been busy jet-setting from starting in the West Coast, then going out to the East Coast to the Hamptons. We can get to that later. And then now permanently moved to Chicago, which is great news for the Chicago Football Show. Expect more in-studio shows as we get closer to the season. I cannot be more pumped. And I'm really excited that you're back here, Carmen, because we're starting the Rivalry Recon series. We're going to dive into the NFC North as a whole, starting with the Green Bay Packers. How was your time off? How excited are you to be back in just a couple weeks from training camp?
Yeah, I leave for a couple weeks and you guys change everything on me. We've got new segments and everything, but clearly I'm still paying for my travels with my voice a little bit. I was in every time zone in the country over the last 2 weeks or so. So it's been a whirlwind, but we had a lot of fun.
Yeah, well, as part of our Rivalry Recon series, not only are we going to have Carmen Vitali, Mike Norman, as we always do, we are bringing in a special guest, Green Bay Packers beat writer from The Athletic, Matt Schneidman, a guy that I know well from our time suffering to cover the Oakland Raiders on a daily basis. Now he's a staple in the NFC North. Go read his stuff at The Athletic and follow him on social media. He's going to have some cool announcements that we're not going to announce now. I tried to convince him to do it on our show. He's going to save it for himself down the road. Lots of good content coming. Matt, thank you so much for joining us. Now that we're in the slow period of the NFL calendar, do you get completely away from it, or is your mind always in a state of Packerness? Like, how's the last couple of weeks been for you?
Yeah, I've had this conversation with my editor. I am currently in my PTO period, but I like working and I like staying busy. Like, I have a couple weeks of PTO to use every year, and I use it last week, this week, and the next week every single year. But like, I can't help myself from making calls and checking in on stuff. So I'm ready for training camp to get here. I don't really probably value vacations and getting away as much as I should, but that's kind of what I've been trained to do since I was a young 22-year-old coming onto the Raiders and getting to see how professional Scott Bair was doing his job. Now I'm a weathered, recently turned 30-year-old man, and look at me now.
Yeah, it's been interesting to kind of follow your coverage for a long time. I mean, you did such a good job getting in there, and you developed this really interesting relationship with Aaron Rodgers. And there's been some great stories. Just go back and search Matt's name and Aaron Rodgers' name. But he's no longer on the team now. Now on the team is focused on another guy you know well, head coach Matt LaFleur and Jordan Love. What do you think of this pairing to this point? It's been a couple of years. How are those guys working together, obviously on the field and behind the scenes?
Yeah, I think it's been pretty positive so far. You go back to the 2023 season, the first year that Jordan Love started, and it was really rocky the first half of the year. And people are wondering, externally at least, where's this going to go? Is the Packers' luck of 30 straight years of Hall of Fame quarterbacks finally running out? And Jordan Love may not be a Hall of Famer, but that season they were 2-5 and they traded Rasul Douglas, who was one of their starting corners, because they were sellers at the deadline. How often do you see the Packers be sellers at the deadline? And then they turn their season around. They beat the Chiefs and the Lions that year, and they make the playoffs and then go and absolutely destroy the Cowboys. And they had a lead going into the fourth quarter of the divisional round against the 49ers, ultimately lost that game by 3. But over the final 8 games of that regular season in 2023, Jordan Love threw 18 touchdowns to 1 interception. It was tremendous. He signs then that offseason, the following offseason, an extension, 4 years, $220 million. But then this season, you know, the expectations were kind of probably unfairly set, at least from the outside, because he was so good the second half of 2023. It was probably unreasonable to think he could always play like that. Well, then last season, his second full year starting, he sprains his MCL in week 1 in Brazil against the Eagles. The Packers are one of the worst teams in the league at catching the football. He suffers another injury midway through the season, a groin injury against the Jaguars in week 8. And then Jordan Love didn't really practice in full consistently until week 11, I think it was. Part of his quote-unquote regression, which Matt LaFleur would disagree with, that's what happened, was his own doing. His footwork was sloppy. He didn't, probably draw defenders away with his eyes as much as he should, some bad decision making. But the Packers are still very, very confident in what they have in Jordan Love, and that he can not only be a guy they can win with, but be a guy they can win because of, if that makes sense. So this partnership is, I think, what the Packers want and then some, at least to start. But the challenge this year, going into the third year of Jordan Love starting, is can the Packers get over the hump? Since I've been covering this team, 2019, they've always been a team that's either in the playoff hunt or making the playoffs, but they can never quite get over the hump, and that's going to be the challenge this season.
Yeah, I'm curious, Matt, your opinion and kind of your perspective on, we heard it last year where Matt LaFleur is like, hey, I don't want to have a wide receiver one. I'm allergic to the term wide receiver one. You don't want to hear it. But when you have those injuries to Jordan Love and he's in and out of the lineup and you're not really afforded the consistency of having the same group of guys on the field at the same time, how much did that kind of affect how effective they were as an offense and Jordan Love's progression in general? And do you think that they're going to take a different approach this year as far as maybe designating one of their receivers as kind of Jordan Love's safety blanket or this or that, the other? Do you think there's going to be a little bit of a different approach this year when it comes to the offense in particular?
That's a good question because, as we all know, for the first time since 2002, the Packers drafted a wide receiver in the first round, and Matthew Golden from Texas. So, he's probably that true number one of the future, but the question here is, can he be that true number one right now in the present?
Sure.
And they have a couple other guys. Jaden Reed is probably their best overall receiver of that group. Dontavian Wicks struggled with drops last year, as did Reed. Christian Watson tore his ACL against the Bears in Week 18, so he's not going to be ready until around the midway point of the season probably. And then you have other guys like Bo Melton, Malik Heath, Romeo Doubs. I don't know why I forgot Romeo Doubs, but Romeo Doubs is probably the most sure-handed guy they have, even though Watson didn't have many drops last year. I think he only had 2. But Carmen, you bring up a good point. Like LaFleur was almost disgusted with that whole discussion last preseason with we don't have that true number one. Now, you could argue both sides. You could say, okay, that's a positive for an offense because other teams can't just key in on who they're going to throw it to, keeps defenses guessing. But nobody's ever going to argue that having a guy like Devontae Adams, like the Packers did, where you knew where the ball was going on every third down, Aaron Rodgers was going to target him 12 times a game, and he was probably going to catch at least 8 of those. Nobody's going to argue that that's a bad thing. We will see kind of the target share that Matthew Golden has, but I think the bottom line is, the Packers have to catch the ball better. True Media ranked them, I think, 29th in the NFL in drops last year. They had more drops. I remember they played the Lions, I think, in week 9 or week 11, I forget. The Packers had 7 drops in that game. Up until that point in the season, the Lions had like 6 on the season. So, yes, Jordan Love's numbers aren't as gaudy, but it's not all his fault. And another interesting point is last season, obviously with Josh Jacobs in his first year with the Packers ran the ball more than they had in any of Matt LaFleur's prior 5 seasons as head coach. So that's another thing Matt LaFleur says when he kind of comes to the defense of his quarterback and why the numbers weren't as flashy as the year before was Jordan Love was playing well, but he was more so a game manager. And I don't mean that negatively with a negative connotation. He just didn't need to put the team on his back. So between them running the ball more and receivers dropping passes and some of the injuries, it was kind of an uneven, rocky year for the offense as a whole. But aside from Watson, they're healthy and they think they're ready to take that next step.
Well, thanks again for joining us, man. And obviously, you kind of laid out a lot of the question marks that might surround the Packers offense. But if you really look around the NFC North, you could probably raise a few questions about each team's offense. Lions obviously losing their play caller with Ben Johnson, heading over to the Bears. Bears in the new system with Ben Johnson, year 2 of Caleb Williams. And then obviously the question marks up in Minnesota. How would you rank these offenses within the NFC North going into this year? Obviously with questions still to be answered as we get into training camp.
Yeah, I don't think you can take the Lions out of number one just because they lost their play caller. They're keeping that in-house. And the big question around them is obviously how are they going to fare without their 2 coordinators? And is Dan Campbell worth what we think he is as a head coach? I think they are. Maybe they take a little dip, but I still think the Lions are the best offense in the division. Their only true big loss was Frank Ragnow, their Pro Bowl center who retired. Number 2, this is an interesting one because I would say the Vikings probably have better skill players than the Packers do, especially at wide receiver. But JJ McCarthy is just such a question mark that I don't know what he is. He may be great. He may end up being better than Jordan Love and Jared Goff and Caleb Williams, but we just don't know that yet. So I'll put the Packers number 2, the Vikings number 3, the Bears number 4. And that's not because I cover the Packers. I like to think of myself as a neutral reporter, but I just want to see. I think the Bears had one of the most impressive off seasons in the league in terms of bolstering their roster, specifically that offensive line. But I'm going to need to see it in action a little bit and Caleb staying upright for an extended period of time before I'm ready to kind of move them up that list. Hopefully that doesn't annoy too many of your viewers.
Well, let's be sure to just clip the smallest portion of that saying that Matt Schneidman is a major Bears hater. Splash it all over social media. Maybe this one. I'm going to take you back to January, Ben Johnson's introductory press conference. And you knew I was going to ask this, right? Is that Ben Johnson slips in there that he's going to enjoy beating Matt LaFleur twice per year. He says that without really having, from what I understand, and in talking to you at the NFL owners meetings, a great relationship or any relationship with the Green Bay Packers coach. I think he was asked about it at the NFL owners meetings. What is Matt's reaction to what Ben Johnson said? Does he care a lot? Is he trying to hide it? Where are we with this whole Ben Johnson sparking or increasing the rivalry with the Packers? Where are we?
Yeah, I think Matt LaFleur was caught off guard when that happened because I think what Ben Johnson said, if I remember correctly, was, I've enjoyed beating Matt LaFleur twice a year because the Lions have had a great amount of success against the Packers in recent years. Haven't won, all their games. The Packers beat them in Detroit on Thanksgiving in 2023, but they did sweep the Packers last year. Yet, to my knowledge, and Matt said this publicly when we were down in Palm Beach, he did not know Ben Johnson. It's not like he was buddy-buddy with him or even coached with him at a past stop. It was kind of just an unprovoked shot. And look, Ryan Poles did the same thing, saying we're going to take back the North. And to a degree, I'm sure you can go around the league and find coaches and GMs and whoever that try to appease the fan base by kind of taking a little dig at a rival. So I don't think Ben Johnson was doing it out of hatred. I think it really just came from a place of, let's get the fans on board here by taking a shot at the Packers because of my success against them from where I came from. But I'm not sure Matt LaFleur took it as playfully. Now, if the Packers beat the Bears this year, I would not be surprised if you see Matt LaFleur step to the podium and says, well, I guess Ben Johnson's not beaten me twice this year or something along those lines. Because I think I like to think I know how Matt LaFleur will. He's very predictable in his press conferences, so I like to imagine that's kind of the thing he'll say. But yeah, there was no prior relationship, and look, it could just be all fun and games, but there may be a little added spice to this rivalry now that Matt LaFleur can no longer say I've never lost to the Bears. He is on a 1-game losing streak to the Chicago Bears.
I will say, as someone who's gotten to cover both of these coaches, they're two of the pettiest coaches I think that I've covered. They keep receipts. They've got a Rolodex of things in their heads, and they act on it. So I'm actually really excited to see this. And I do think you're right, Matt, that was part of it where Ben Johnson, whoever was media coaching him, is doing a good job because he honestly has aced all of his pressers and taking that shot, I think, to get the fans riled up and get the fans on his side, I think it was probably, media training 101. So good for him. And if it starts a little rivalry between these guys, I love it. But I want to go away from the head coaching a little bit, and I want to go back to the Packers and the defense in general, because we haven't talked about the defense yet. And I think that there are some major question marks for the Packers with the defense, because you bring in Jeff Hafley last year. It goes well. As far as, remaking the entire scheme and doing something different, and kind of, you trade Preston Smith at the deadline because he doesn't quite fit into the scheme and all that. But I think if you were to ask Packer fans, and correct me if I'm wrong, what their biggest concern is this year, it's they haven't been able to get to the quarterback. Yeah. And what are they doing to help that? Because I think that there's a certain amount of patience you need when you do go through a scheme overhaul like they did. But at some point or another, you're going to need to start affecting these quarterbacks, especially in this division with these offensive lines. So what have you seen from them? Just, in OTAs, is there anything different, or do you think that they're going to use any guys differently? I'm very interested to see how they kind of approach the pass rush this year.
You and I both. I think there were two big storylines with the Packers defense this offseason, and that was, okay, what are they going to do with their pass rush? Because, Matt LaFleur said after this past season that they went into this season first year with Jeff Hafley as defensive coordinator after he came from 4 years as Boston College's head coach, and they thought they were going to be able to generate pressure on the quarterback by rushing a traditional 4. That was not the case. So what they did pretty much was they implemented these exotic rushes, what they call simulated pressures. In other words, they'll crowd 6 or 7 guys at the line of scrimmage, and then they'll only rush 4, but one of the guys they're rushing is a safety or a linebacker while they drop a defensive lineman into coverage. So it looks like a blitz with Xavier McKinney coming off the edge or Edgerrin Cooper coming through the A or B gap, but it's really still just sending 4 and dropping 7 into coverage. But obviously they're called simulated pressures or exotic looks because they look exotic, even though it's still rushing 4. They want to get back to being able to just rushing a traditional 4 defensive lineman and pressuring the quarterback like the Philadelphia Eagles did so well en route to a Super Bowl title. There were all the rumors and the outside talk about, Myles Garrett, TJ Watt, still, Trey Hendrickson. Are they going to draft a pass rusher in the first round? They didn't touch that group aside from drafting a couple guys on day 3 of the draft. Their top 4 remains the same as of now with Rashawn Gary, Lucas Van Ness, Brenton Cox, and Kingsley Enagbare. Now, if you look at the Packers' pressure and sack numbers, they're not bad. Top 10, I think, or near the top 10 in both. But they were far too hit and miss. They had a couple games against the Seahawks and the Titans where they had 8 sacks and 7 sacks, but then they'll just go missing for other games. And Brian Gutekunst, their general manager, said after the season that group was far too inconsistent. And he also said he still thought they had the guys in the room that could get the job done. They also fired their defensive line coach. So that spoke to the belief inside the building that it's not the players, it's the coach. But you need a guy like Lucas Van Ness, a Chicago area guy, to make that jump. They took him with the number 13 overall pick in 2023, and he has yet to break out. So he's going to need to. And then just quickly, the other thing with the defense, they lose Jair Alexander this offseason. They release him. He signs with the Ravens. It's understandable because he missed 20 games due to 4 different injuries the last 2 seasons. When healthy, he's one of the best corners in the league. The last 2 seasons in which he played double-digit games, he was an all-pro in both of those years. But that was in 2020 and 2022. He just couldn't stay healthy. So yes, there's questions with the pass rush, but there's also questions in the secondary. They added Nate Hobbs, the nickel corner from the Raiders, paying him $12 million a year. They're going to play him on the outside too. And then Keyshawn Nixon's going to play on the outside. Can you defend the likes of DJ Moore and Justin Jefferson and Amon-Ra St. Brown with Keyshawn Nixon, who's a converted nickel, and Nate Hobbs, who's also a converted nickel, in this division? I think that's a huge question mark too. But Jeff Hafley, they finished 6th in the league in scoring defense last year. Their run defense was drastically improved. If there's anyone who can do it, it's him, I think.
I'm glad you kind of frame it within the context of the division, but also in the NFC too, right? And I know obviously for Packer fans and other fans in the NFC North, they're looking for, a potential Super Bowl run or, a Super Bowl appearance. There haven't been many for the NFC North here, right? Packers have had the last 2 in about 20 years, right? And when you go back to it, I think that a lot of people talked about the NFC North last year as one of the toughest divisions, and rightfully so. Obviously, the Lions were up there. The Vikings had a great year. Do you think that there is a Super Bowl contender in this division, whether it's the Packers, whether it's the Lions, and can they go up against the teams like the Eagles or the Niners, where we see that depth on those teams really stands out? And you see it in NFC West football, and obviously we saw it last year with the Eagles as well. Do the Lions, do the Packers have enough, and have the Packers done enough to kind of contend?
I don't know yet because, like I said, there weren't those marquee big splashes this offseason to say, okay, they definitely made a jump. And like in 2023, they got Josh Jacobs and Xavier McKinney, who both were Pro Bowlers. McKinney was a first-team All-Pro. There was a lot this offseason from within the building of we trust our guys. We just need to catch the ball better and make those internal improvements as opposed to going out and making splash acquisitions. The other big money guy they got was Aaron Banks, their new left guard, who had started for the 49ers the last couple of years. But not, and maybe it was a product of the free agent crop this season not being great, but they didn't make that big splash that'll have fans thrilled and saying, oh, we made the jump. But, maybe Matt LaFleur and Brian Gutekunst and the Packers staff are right in saying that they have enough guys who are going to make that year 2 to year 3 or year 1 to year 2 jump that can take them over the hump. I can only sit here and say that the NFC North has one Super Bowl contender, and I think that's the Lions. And they were that last year, and they lost their first playoff game. So you never really know what's going to happen. The Bears, I think I could see taking that jump with some of the additions they made. Maybe not Super Bowl contender, but certainly a playoff team. The Vikings, I'm not ready to put in that group yet because the quarterback position is just such a question mark. And the Packers, I think they're a playoff team, but I can't say they're a Super Bowl contender yet because, heck, they went 0-6 against the 3 teams better than them in the NFC last year. And that's not a Super Bowl contender. That's a playoff contender, not a Super Bowl contender. They lost twice to the Lions, the Eagles, and the Vikings last year. Those were 6 of their 7 losses, the other one being the Bears in Week 18. So it's a fascinating division, as it always is. I think it'll be even more competitive because I think the Bears raised the floor of the division this offseason. But I'm excited to see how it all kind of plays out this year.
And if you want to hear more of our Rivalry Recon series, please subscribe to the Chicago Football Show anywhere that you get your podcasts, on YouTube, or do what we'd really like you to do, which is download the Marquee Sports Network app. Matt, just a couple more questions with you. And one relates to Josh Jacobs. And look, we know how his season went. That was good. But I'm curious about when you evaluate the life of this 4-year contract. Right now, it's his base salary is going to kick up in 26 and 27, and there's always this fear, and there's exceptions to every rule. The Derrick Henry exception about how will he last over the life of his contract as he heads towards his age 29 season, which is in 2027. So I guess I'm just curious that look, he's been really good now, but do you see a player who, and maybe this is an unfair question, but do you see a player with the work ethic, build, and durability to be a productive back on the back end of this contract?
I really do because, going into this past season, since 2019, when Josh Jacobs entered the league, he had the second most carries and rushing yards in the NFL behind Derrick Henry, of course. This season, if I'm not mistaken, Josh Jacobs played every game. He was rested the second half of that Bears game in Week 18. And like you said, he's going to be 27 for the entirety of this coming season. He turned 27 in February. And he said, I think it was at locker cleanout day or when we talked to him during the offseason program, that he feels better right now than he did at this point last season. And like I said, this was a year in which the Packers ran the ball more than they had in the last 5 years under Matt LaFleur. So that was part of the reason they made the switch at running back from Aaron Jones to Josh Jacobs, because of durability. And Josh Jacobs proved them right in making that decision for that reason, that reason being one of several. But I certainly could see the Packers riding this out with Jacobs. I don't know if it's going to be for the full length of the 4 years because, like you said, and we all know how contracts work in the NFL, it could be 4 years, $48 million, which is what Jacobs' deal was. But there is an easy out for the Packers after 2 years. It's really a 2-year deal, and then they'll go year by year after that. So he's obviously on the team this year, but I see no reason, unless he suffers some catastrophic career-altering injury, knock on wood, we obviously hope that doesn't happen. I see no reason why this can't be a 3, 4, maybe even longer partnership if he continues being durable and productive as he was this past year.
Well, and a unit that can make that easier for him is the offensive line, which I feel like uncharacteristically last year, the Packers had a little bit more question marks about the productivity. Still don't necessarily know where to play Elton Jenkins. But they go out and get Aaron Banks. and conceivably fortify the offensive line a little bit more with a veteran. Do you think that they kind of have the idea of who's going to start where so that they can keep that consistent the rest of the season and then perhaps open things up for guys like Josh Jacobs or obviously Jordan Love?
For sure. I mean, their pass protection numbers will look good. If you look up whatever advanced stats, I think they were third in the NFL in sack rate allowed on True Media. But they made these moves because they need to shore up their pass protection and emphasize their run blocking more. Here's a stat that I think plays into that. It's another True Media stat. Josh Jacobs had less than 1 yard before contact per carry. In other words, opposing defensive lines, pass rushes, run defenses were making contact with him very early in his runs. But he ranked near the top of the league in yards after contact per rush. He had over 3. So in layman's terms, for anyone listening, defenses were able to generate penetration and contact Josh Jacobs early, but he did well after contact. So their run blocking needed to improve at the point of attack as well, in addition to their pass protection. They let Josh Myers walk in free agency. He was their starting center of the last 4 years. And they signed Banks, as I mentioned, to a 4-year, $77 million deal, I think it was, something like that. He's going to play left guard. Elton Jenkins, who has twice made the Pro Bowl at left guard, is going to be their starting center. Now, they liked Elton Jenkins most at center coming out of Mississippi State in 2019 when they took him in the second round. But Elton Jenkins did hold out of the offseason program, reportedly because he wanted more. Let me phrase this Rob Domofsky report correctly. He wanted more guarantees because centers don't make as much as left guards. So he wanted to kind of protect himself against the potential loss of earnings in the future because of the position switch. So Elton didn't practice at all this offseason. He's played center before, but we'll see how that kind of progresses in camp. And then Zach Tom at right tackle. He's due for an extension going into the final year of his rookie deal. He's, I would say, probably one of the more underrated O-linemen in the league. He was the third highest all-pro vote getter among right tackles in the NFL behind Lane Johnson and Penei Sewell. So Tom at right tackle, Jenkins at center, Aaron Banks at left guard, then Rasheed Walker, their starting left tackle of the last couple of years, probably going to start there. Right guard's the only question mark because they have Jordan Morgan, who they drafted in the first round in 2024, missed a lot of last year with a shoulder injury. He can play right guard. They've been working him at left tackle. They also have Sean Ryan out of Scott's alma mater, UCLA, who they drafted in the third round a couple years ago, who can play right guard. So there's really 3 sure things on that offensive line and then a couple, question marks going into camp. But you're right, Carmen. There was an emphasis this offseason to kind of shore up that offensive line. You think about the Packers, think about Bakhtiari, Corey Linsley, TJ Lang, Josh Sitton. Like, they're always great at finding offensive linemen and developing them. They need to do that again this year because a $220 million quarterback and $48 million running back are only as good as the protection in front of them.
And that offensive line dilemma is obviously a universal theme for a lot of teams in the NFL, but obviously the Bears are part of that too. You mentioned the need for Caleb Williams to be upright this year in the Bears offense and how important that is going to be for the Bears' success. It's the same for the Packers. We know Jordan Love getting hurt early in the year maybe derailed them a little bit or slowed them down. But you brought up also the money. The factor of Jordan Love is in that $50 million quarterback club. And the Bears are in this period where they're playing with a rookie quarterback contract. How has that kind of affected where the Packers are able to go in free agency? And maybe comparing that to the situation like the Bears have, a rookie deal has allowed them to give them that flexibility that we've seen in Chicago of adding offensive linemen. How have they dealt with that dynamic, the Packers, and obviously in comparison with the Bears too?
Yeah, I mean, that's always the talking point when you have a quarterback on a rookie deal is you better take advantage of that time period now, like what the Texans have or what the Bears have right now, because sooner or later you're going to have to pay him, at the time CJ Stroud and Caleb Williams get paid, it's going to be probably in the $60 million per year with how the salary cap and quarterback salaries progress every year. I don't think it affected the Packers spending too much because they had plenty of cap space this offseason since these last couple of years, and especially this offseason, is really the other side of the Aaron Rodgers era. So They have finally got out from kicking the can down the road with all the veteran-heavy team, whether it's Devontae Adams, David Bakhtiari, even a guy like Robert Tonyan, Aaron Rodgers, obviously. They moved on from that veteran-heavy team and into what has now been the two youngest NFL playoff teams in the last 45 years are the 2023 Packers and the 2024 Packers. My point in saying that is just because they have a quarterback on a big salary now, I don't think it's, restricted spending too much in other areas. And really, they only had Love on a rookie contract for 1 year, and it was on, his fifth year. So I think, 2020, 2021, 22. No, it was on his fourth year. Sorry. So they only really had one season to spend when they had a quarterback on a rookie deal. So they didn't really get to take advantage of it for 4 or 5 years like the Bears will be able to. But you're right, Michael. I think the Bears, speaking on them, definitely have to take advantage of that. And that's what you've seen them do this offseason is spend money elsewhere to try and make life as easy as possible for Caleb Williams. And that's what you have to do to try and contend when he's still cheap, relatively speaking.
And I'd kind of like to dovetail on that question because you brought up something that is interesting and you normally don't see happen. And it's this. Normally when you go from super veteran heavy, older quarterback with high cap hits, you got to make cuts, you got to eat dead money. And then you might have to cycle from the bottom. Right. Mm-hmm. Look at what the Patriots have done. And there are lots of examples of teams that just got to blow the whole thing up. Well, the Packers didn't blow the whole thing up. In fact, they found a way to somehow keep it going and do this full age revolution from your kind of inside seat. How are they able to do that? It seems that it's not as common maybe as the other way of we're just going to have to take our lumps, draft somebody high and start over.
Yeah, the Packers have been really good at drafting and developing over the years, and they started to do that before the Aaron Rodgers era came to an end. I mean, they had Christian Watson and Romeo Doubs for the last year of Aaron Rodgers, and they obviously had guys like Elton Jenkins and Zach Tom and Josh Myers in 2022, and other guys that I could go down the whole roster that they did a good job of preparing for the post Aaron Rodgers era before it happened. Some of it's luck, some of it's good fortune, and finding guys like, Jordan Love and striking relative gold with Keyshawn Nixon in free agency, a guy that has played in both the Aaron Rodgers and the Jordan Love era. But I think it really is just a testament to Brian Gutekunst and the job that he's done. Is he the best general manager in football? No, but it does take skill to rebuild a roster. Or, that's the word David Bakhtiari used at the time. It's more of a retool because a rebuild, you're kind of starting from scratch, like you said, Scott, and eating 1 or 2 losing seasons that are going to be losing seasons. The Packers missed the playoffs in their last year with Aaron Rodgers, and they went to the divisional round in their first year with Jordan Love. So a lot of it is obviously, Love getting better under Rodgers and the Packers striking gold with that draft pick, even though it was very controversial when they did it. But a lot of it, too, is also, hitting in free agency with guys like Jacobs and McKinney, but also getting young guys that don't have to take on starring roles in the last year of Aaron Rodgers and having them develop and become something when Jordan Love takes over. And like I said, the 2 youngest teams by average age to make the playoffs in the last 45 seasons are the 2024 Packers and the 2023 Packers. Right now, though, that lack of experience and youth, that quote-unquote excuse is out the window. Now it's time to increase that sense of urgency and get over the hump. And they're not, they still might be the youngest team in the NFL, but that's not really an excuse anymore.
It's interesting because I think this is a really relevant conversation to what I try to tell a lot of people about the Packers, that they can operate very differently because of their ownership structure or lack thereof than most teams can. And I think it results in this continuity. It results in, being able to stay at this level of success that other teams just can't do. And I'm curious to see, for someone that covers them on the daily in Green Bay, all of that, what are the differences that you've seen with the Packers being able to, just in their moves in general and how they structure their team building efforts versus other teams that you've covered where they do have an owner to answer to. They do have just kind of the more traditional structure within the building and how much that matters.
Yeah, I think it can be a positive and a negative. Mm-hmm. The thing with the Packers is the way their organizational structure is set up, the president, who is basically the owner, is not involved in football decisions. Whereas in other organizations, you might have the literal owner getting final say on all big football decisions. It's ironic you ask this now because the Packers are actually changing team presidents for the first time in 17 years this summer. So Ed Policy, who's been in the organization for the past 13 years, will be taking over for Mark Murphy, who's been the team president since 2007, 2008. But the way it works here in Green Bay is the general manager and the head coach both report to the team president. But Ed Policy, he sat down with us 2 weeks ago and said, I don't want any say in football decisions. They can run things by me, but I'm not going to overrule them or try to, push them in one direction or another. So I'm going to be careful when I say this. In other organizations, you might have non-football guys making football decisions. Mm-hmm. To an extent, all these owners know football because they're around football. But in the Packers organization, it's Brian Gutekunst and then Matt LaFleur making football decisions. So you would probably trust those guys to make these calls more so than a Woody Johnson or an owner who comes in with deep pockets and has to have their final say on everything. And I'm sure there are other owners throughout the league like that. That's not the case here in Green Bay. Again, like I said, it may not be the best thing because sometimes you need that authoritative voice to come in and make a decision, and it might work out. But the Packers don't have that deep pockets owner. It's more so up to the GM and the head coach to make all those football decisions. And I just think the general belief and principle of trying to draft and develop and keeping continuity within the organization, whether it's with quarterbacks that are there for a long time or head coaches and GMs that are there for a long time, like Mike McCarthy and Ted Thompson were before Brian Gutekunst and Matt LaFleur. They just have a very traditional way of doing things here in Green Bay. Over the wide scope of NFL history, it's worked out, but they haven't been to a Super Bowl in 15, almost 16 years now. So does it really work out? To an extent, yes. But like I've been saying, they got to find a way to end that drought.
And this has been a great conversation with Matt Schneidman, and we cannot let you go without a 3-question rapid fire. Only one of them has to do with football. Okay, so apologies for the first one. I didn't write this question, but here we go.
You're deflecting blame already.
You know I am. You know I am. And we promise we will not clip this one. Your hot take Bears fans don't want to hear.
My hot take that Bears fans don't want to hear is that I don't even know if this is a hot take. I don't want to get too hot, but I would say my prediction that Bears fans don't want to hear is the Packers are going to resume normal business and just beat the Bears twice again this year. And I'll throw this in just to stick another knife in the Bears' wound. Aaron Rodgers is going to beat them in Chicago too.
Yeah, well, that would be that would be doubly difficult. Now, let's go away from the gridiron here to a tweet that you sent on. Yeah, we've done our homework at 11:11 a.m. on June 25th. You bought a ticket for $72, 3 rows behind the Pirates dugout. You saw Paul Skeens, and of course, I'm not going to be able to pronounce it.
Jacob Mizorowski.
Thank you very much for the save right there. The question is this: how would you explain Skeens versus Mizorowski in football terms?
That is a great question.
Yeah, I didn't write that out.
It's hard because pitchers can, I would say, dictate a game more than maybe not more than quarterbacks, but it's someone who touches the ball on every single play. And obviously baseball and football are different, but I would equate it to this is interesting. I would equate it to Patrick Mahomes versus Jaden Daniels because Paul Skeens is the best pitcher in one league, and that I'm going to still give that to Patrick Mahomes, even though Josh Allen won MVP and Mahomes wasn't great last year. And then I'll say Jaden Daniels because Mizorowski's a rookie, and he has been the best pitcher in baseball for the last couple weeks. I'm no Brewers fan, obviously, as you can tell by my hat, but one who's an established great pitcher, even though Paul Skeens is already in his second year, that's Mahomes, I would say. And then the next up-and-coming MVP candidate. And nobody knows Jacob Mizorowski, but he's unbelievable for the Brewers. So I would say just a high-profile matchup between two guys who have the ball in their hands every play who people are there to see. I hope that makes sense. I don't know if
it does actually, and I think it kind of does have a parallel. And we're really happy that you wore the Yankees hat today for this last question. Matt Schneidman, diehard Yankees fan, went to Syracuse from New York, the whole shebang, Connecticut, that whole area. Okay, the Dodgers beat the Yankees in the 2024 World Series. What did you learn about yourself from that experience? Deep thoughts.
Learned that I am an irresponsible spender of money, which I already knew, but I spent, I think, about $1,700 of my own money to stand at Game 3 of the World Series. So we were in Jacksonville for Packers-Jaguars in Week 8 of that season. That was on a Sunday. Game 3 of the World Series at Yankee Stadium was on Monday. So I stopped in New York on my way back to Green Bay from Jacksonville and had a standing room only ticket for $1,700. Freddie Freeman hit a 2-run home run right in my face on like the 5th pitch of the game. Yankees never stood a chance. What I learned from that whole experience, whether it's Freddie's walk-off grand slam in Game 1 or the Yankees' 5th inning collapse in Game 5 when, they were up 5-0, and I really thought at that point they were going to win the World Series, I learned that being a diehard sports fan is unhealthy, but there's nothing I can do to change that. I'm stuck.
Welcome to Bears Fans World. Matt Schneidman from The Athletic, thank you so much for joining us on Rivalry Recon. Appreciate the time and the conversation.
Thanks, y'all, as always.
Thanks again to Green Bay Packers beat writer from The Athletic, Matt Schneidman, an old friend of mine, and Carmen's. Always appreciate talking football with him. And again, subscribe to the Chicago Football Show as we continue our Rivalry Recon series. We will be talking about another NFC North team coming up again next week. And here's my transition from that. It was a good question that Michael asked about NFC North offenses. And if we could have a little synergy here, put it all together. Today I wrote for MarqueeSportsNetwork.com as part of my NFC North Power Ranking series. I ranked the NFC North quarterbacks. I put it in this order. Jared Goff at 1, Jordan Love at 2, and I thought about it for a long time. Caleb Williams at 3, and J.J. McCarthy at 4. I put McCarthy at the bottom because he hasn't taken a formal NFL regular season snap, right? I put Jared Goff at the top because he completed 74.2% of his passes last year. I don't care what his national reputation is. That's incredible. But I did want to ask you this, Carmen, right? And so I had an issue with Jordan Love versus Caleb Williams, mostly because I didn't like how Jordan Love played at the end of the year last year. But I texted around and people said, you're foolish. If you want to pick a guy to go win a game based on what he's done in this league to this point, take the guy that's taken a team to 2 playoff appearances and a guy who has thrown for 4,200 yards, right? Is there a case to be made for Caleb Williams at 2, or do you think that's a Jordan Love lock spot with the 4 quarterbacks that are presumptive starters in the NFC North?
It's funny because I really do think that there's the potential for any of those 3 to be in any order. Given what I think Caleb Williams' ceiling is now with Ben Johnson, more importantly, probably what his floor is. I really am optimistic as to how Ben Johnson can develop Caleb Williams and put him right in the conversation with Jared Goff and Jordan Love. I've been higher, I think, on Jordan Love than most people since he took over the starting job. And I was rewarded for it at the back half of that first season when he did take the Packers to the divisional round like we talked about with Matt. But, I mean, Jordan Love got to sit on the bench for 3 years and watch. And that kind of experience, that kind of runway is invaluable just from a mental standpoint. And so much of playing quarterback in this league is mental. And so to have that kind of lockdown now, last year he struggled with the injuries, and I think that really threw him off. But if you get a fully healthy Jordan Love on top of kind of his mental acuity as far as being a quarterback goes, I would maybe even put him over Jared Goff in some scenarios, again, provided all those parameters, while also thinking that Jared Goff was probably underrated, or probably still is underrated, given the success that he's led the Lions to, and the fact that he is that veteran leader for them. And he does have those really, really just incredibly solid stats, everything that you need out of your quarterback. So it's really interesting. And then J.J. McCarthy is just a huge question mark. He could also factor into that. I don't really know what to do with these quarterbacks in this division, because they're also surrounded by a lot of talent. So they're not doing it alone. They've got really good support systems. Now that Caleb Williams is going to have an offensive line, hopefully, I think there's a case to be made for anything. So is there a case for Caleb Williams to be number 2? Absolutely. Is there a case for Caleb Williams to be number 1? We'll see. But I think any of those quarterbacks can really go anywhere at this point, given the team that they have around them and the coaches that they have around them, probably more importantly.
Yeah, I'm with you, Carm. I think that by the end of the season, you really could see any order of quarterbacks in terms of ranking. Obviously, you might have to look at it in two different ways. Fantasy, a lot of people like to look at football in the terms of fantasy stats and how much yardage and touchdowns you're putting up versus who's going to be the most productive, who's going to be able to get wins for your team. I personally think Jared Goff is going to take a step back. I think the Lions as a whole are going to take a step back. I think it's very hard to transition to a new offensive coordinator. I don't care how many weapons you have. I don't care how good of a quarterback you are. I think it's going to be hard to replicate what they've had over the last few seasons. So that's my personal feeling on it. I think Jordan Love is in a huge year right now, right? Like, he could really go either way. And I think, like you said, I don't think anybody would be surprised if he is the best quarterback in this division by the end of the year. I don't think many people around the league would be surprised if you also see him kind of repeat the same mistakes that he's made. Sure, he's been able to take him to the playoffs, but he's going to be a guy that could take him to that next level. We've seen maybe turnovers become a problem with Jordan Love, especially in big moments. So I think it's a ceiling and a floor conversation. Caleb Williams maybe has the highest ceiling, right? I think some people would argue that with his potential, maybe he could go to the highest ability out of all those guys. But he might also have the lowest floor if you take J.J. McCarthy out of that as well, too. So I think it's going to be up to Caleb Williams to really kind of dictate for himself where he's going to place. But I think Jordan Love, Caleb Williams, Jared Goff, J.J. McCarthy, you have a good quarterback division. So let's see what's going to happen with all those guys. But I'm going to take Caleb Williams going to be at least 2 by the end of the year. At least 2.
Yeah, and when you look at this group of quarterbacks, you have 4 first-round picks, Love taken 26th. 2 of these guys, Goff and Williams, taken at number 1. And since we're kind of on the theme here, this was the second installment of NFC North Power Rankings, which you can check out at MarqueeSportsNetwork.com. The first one, I think you guys might get after me a little bit, and I'm going to be okay with it. I did head coaches, right? And this is on the fly. You guys probably don't know the ranking yet. My ranking, maybe I can see Carmen yelling at me in about 1 minute. I didn't put Dan Campbell on top. I put Kevin O'Connell at 1, Dan Campbell at 2, and then I put Matt LaFleur at 3 and Ben Johnson at 4. Now, I had to explain I put Ben Johnson at 4 because he hasn't coached a regular season game yet. We have no idea how he's going to be as a game manager. We have no idea how he's going to be able to produce at the end of the year. And this is based on right now. It's not my prediction for what it's going to be at the end of the year. So just so I can plead my case and you guys can tear it apart, is that Kevin O'Connell, if you look at it, he's really good in one-score games, which is part luck but part skill. He has taken Sam Darnold to the highest possible level. He had Kirk Cousins get hurt and still managed a decent year. And his first year, I think, went 13-4. But Dan Campbell is this leader of men, dude, and they're very different. So I had a really hard time with this because then we're ignoring what the Packers have done under their current head coach, which is nothing but playoffs and transitioning from Aaron Rodgers and keeping this train going, which is exactly what Matt Schneidman just said. I don't know if it's right or wrong. I'm just curious. What do you guys think about that?
Let me jump in here, Scott.
Go for it.
Because I think I'm going to make Carmen even more mad with this. I think Matt LaFleur is a better coach than Dan Campbell. No, I know. But I know you like Dan Campbell, and we all do. I think if you're a football person, you love Dan Campbell. But especially, I think, like you're saying, I think KOC has proven himself as a coach. He's obviously done it multiple times. Matt LaFleur, all he has done is win. Honestly, it's hard to say that with the Packers, but Dan Campbell, it's a huge year for him to prove himself besides hiring great coordinators like he's done. Great coaches will always do that. You look at Bill Belichick, how they were able to recycle and get new coordinators. That's part of being the top guy, part of being the CEO. But we haven't seen him have success without those guys. If he does it this year, boom, put him right at the top. I have no problem with that. But I think KOC and Matt LaFleur deserve some credit. I think it's fair to put Ben Johnson fourth just because he hasn't done it. I think, give him a chance to do it. We'll revisit this at the end of the season.
Yeah, I'm not mad at any of this, guys. Like, I would put Kevin O'Connell one coach of the year. Like, obviously if he's the best coach in the league this year, he can be the best coach in the division. And the way that he's been able to develop players and the way that he plays, his situational awareness and taking guys off the street essentially at the quarterback position and playing live action Madden with them. I keep using that phrase when it comes to him, but it's true. And the way that he builds his team and calls his games. I'm such a huge fan of Kevin O'Connell. I'm a huge fan of Dan Campbell. I'm a huge fan of Matt LaFleur for all of the reasons that you guys said. And I'm going to be a big fan of Ben Johnson, I think, because I was a huge fan of him as a coordinator. But it just depends on what you value more. Like, Dan Campbell is the one that can will a team to a playoff run or will a team to beat a division rival to keep them out of the playoffs, even though they have nothing to play for. Those types of things matter when you are talking about Super Bowl contenders, because it's not just talent, it's not just skill, it is belief. Like, there's so many intangibles that go into those teams that win Super Bowls. So I think that's important too. But then, yeah, Matt LaFleur, he has a track record of success, and he's a really good play caller. He's one of those guys that's just an offensive guru, and he just does it year in and year out, no matter who he has under center, who he has at receiver. We'll see how this all shakes out as far as the receiver room in Green Bay this year. But I love all of these coaches. I think that this division has the best coaches in the league, and that's why you see these teams play each other so tough.
Yeah, I think it's going to be another tough year, and head coaching matters as much or more than any other in major sport. So does quarterback. And we're going to get into all the other skill playerness stuff as we move on. Rivalry Recon continues next week. Rate, review, subscribe to the Chicago Football Show. Download the Watch Marquee app. Do it like right now. Please and thank you. For Scott and Carmen and Michael, we're out of here. See ya.